Sure. Thank you so much, Steve. Really happy to be here on this Sunday after the whole UK elections whirlwind, and very happy to speak to you all about a topic that's really close to my heart. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Bibi, and I'm a Ugandan Dutch climate justice organiser with an organisation called Point UK, and I'm also part of the global Stop EACOP campaign, and within that specifically coordinate the London grassroots group. So I'm going to be talking to you today mainly about Stop EACOP and my travels to East Africa, my homeland, and what the effects are of this campaign and why we are campaigning on this. So before I talk to you about all of that, I'll take you back to the beginning. So it's the year 2006, and oil speculators in Uganda stumble upon this long sought after reserve in the beautiful Lake Albert. And our president, who some of you, I'm sure most of you know, some may call him a dictator as well, Museveni, at this point was in power for 20 years. And he declared that production would commence in 2009. And he argued that oil drilling would spare Ugandans from biting poverty, even though the government projected zero revenue from the project for decades to come. And Museveni is still in power today, and his bankrollers and business partners, who in this case are French oil giant Total Energies and China National Offshore Oil Corporation, also known as CNOOC, and I will be referring to it as CNOOC because it's such a long name. And the neoliberal regimes of Uganda and Tanzania have been unable to commence production. So this is massive. So the proposed East African crude oil pipeline, EACOP for short, would be 900 miles long and cut through Uganda and Tanzania, including lands inhabited by farmers and waters used by local fisherfolk. And EACOP, together with two oil fields called Telenga and Kingfisher, and these oil fields are both in Uganda, will pass through critical areas of biodiversity. It will threaten incredibly sensitive ecosystems, and a third of the pipeline will be built within the basin of Lake Victoria, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with as well. It's Africa's largest freshwater body, and that would endanger the water supply for more than 40 million people. And obviously, this pipeline and the oil extracted will not be for East Africans to use. It will go to the port of Tanga in Tanzania to be shipped away to the global north for consumption. And it will develop the pockets of those in the global north, all whilst destroying the land, the resources, the lives and heritage of people in East Africa. And it's been called by many, including myself, as an example of colonial exploitation. Communities are being displaced, people are losing their livelihoods, and voices are being silenced to prioritize the growing wealth of a small few. Our natural resources are being shipped away, and in East Africa, people are left to grapple with the consequences of that extraction. Since the oil construction at the Kingfisher project, so that's one of the oil fields, started in 2013, which is owned by CNOOC, so the Chinese stakeholder in Lake Albert, many lives have been affected. For generations, fishing has been the engine of the local economy, but now communities of fisherfolk have been relocated to places where they can't engage with their trade in the same way. They were forced to accept unilaterally determined compensation and face constant threats if they didn't accept resettlement. And when EACOP's construction enters into the next phase, with the actual installation of the pipeline itself, so they haven't gotten there yet, many community members don't know where they can go or how they can support their families because the compensation that they've received for their houses, their crops, their land is grossly insufficient to set up life somewhere else. And as in most East African communities, farmland in Uganda is traditionally owned by men, but cultivated by women. And this is very important because women are the backbone of the economy. But of course, the companies have chosen to compensate men in the communities, excluding many women for planning resettlement for their households. And when the money comes, the women never see it. And in some cases are also abandoned by their partners after payment of compensation. And single women who have access to land receive absolutely nothing. And since oil construction has started, fisherfolk, as I said, there's many fishers communities have lost access to their ground, and their waters are already getting polluted. There's also heightened security by the military who are surveying the lake on behalf of the oil companies. And witness testimonies of the community describe nearly daily assaults by the occupying soldiers, including sexual abuse, forcing women to choose between providing fish or having sex with them. And when I visited Uganda and Tanzania early this year, as I mentioned before, I met several fantastic organizers, people who are personally affected by the project, as well as NGOs who are supporting grassroots mobilizations. And they informed me of Ugandan soldiers burning fishing boats and equipment essential to local livelihoods of people near the Kingfisher oil project. Hundreds of villages were deprived of their primary source of income, and instead of holding the people responsible for this horrific act, many villages were arrested themselves. So, the circumstances are quite dire. And these communities, which stretch from Lake Albert to the small Indian Ocean port city of Tanga, have long histories of rich ecological understanding that are capable.
What's happening? Sounds like it's frozen. We lost connection.
Hello. I don't know.
You just hold up. Okay. Seems like we've reconnected now. You are frozen for a while there.
Oh no, so
Bibi, I
sorry.
am not sure if you are aware. Yes.
I don't know why my internet has been playing up. I'm so sorry.
The last
Hopefully,
thing you mentioned was the sex fuel or fish as
yes. Okay, thank you for bearing with me. Sometimes my internet is it's been a bit shaky. Okay, so I mentioned the soldiers abuse. So these are soldiers employed by this is like the Ugandan defense soldiers, and they're employed by CNOC, so the Chinese investors or stakeholders, and also by French oil company Total. And so there's been a really bad increase of militarization around the oil projects. But yeah, despite that, there's still many fantastic organizers, both people who are personally affected by the project, as well as NGOs who are working to fight and mobilize grassroots groups on it. They are doing everything they can despite the repression. And when I met with some of them earlier this year, they also informed me of Ugandan soldiers burning fishing boats and equipment essential to the local livelihoods of the people near the Kingfisher oil project. And in that instance, hundreds of villages were deprived of their primary source of income. And instead of holding the people responsible for this horrific act, many villages were arrested themselves. So yeah, as I said, this is the situation is dire. And these are communities that have long histories of rich ecological understanding, very much capable of helping us survive the troubling climate catastrophes ahead. And in this instance, having a heated crude oil pipeline capable of discharging 200,000 barrels per day is probably the most crassly violent project that would erode all this knowledge and leadership that the communities have. But despite all this, there is good news because the construction of EACOP has stagnated massively due to efforts on the ground in Uganda and Tanzania, and also this coordinated global campaign that has put pressure on stakeholders in the global north, as we have done here where I live in the financial heart in London. And so far, we've been able to secure pledges from 29 major commercial banks and 28 insurers across the world not to finance the pipeline. And the latest target has been Standard Bank, the South African Standard Bank, but they're owned by a larger Chinese conglomerate. Their headquarters have already been disrupted by Extinction Rebellion organizers, and we will continue to pressure them. And these pushes for divestment have really slowed down EACOP's production line. Like I mentioned, They found oil in 2006. It's now 2024. There's still no drop of oil that has been extracted or has gone anywhere, and the pipeline is not even been set up, and they were meant to have the pipeline in place next year, 2025, and they're nowhere near that because they don't have the financial backing. So this resisting of corporate colonialism has not been easy, as I mentioned, by the young African climate activists, even going to doing something as simple as delivering a results in brutal arrest and beatings, which is why it's so important that a global campaign supports and it stands in solidarity with the communities who are on the front line. And it's great that, you know, our campaign has garnered so much attention worldwide in the wider climate justice movement, and particularly also in France. There's been some great resistance from activists there. They, in one instance, they drew down a sticky tape through different French communities to outline a fictitious pipeline, and that incited public outrage around the finance sector because people realized that, you know, they aren't listening, or they aren't meeting social and environmental standards. And there's also continuous pressure on Macron, who has shifted the blame to the private sector, even though he's been one of the most vocal global political leaders endorsing the project. But it is a sign that among world leaders, affiliation with EACOP is increasingly understood as shameful. So that is positive. But despite, you know, these piecemeal actions and campaigns, it's not been enough to stop the project, as EACOP stakeholders are determined to see it being completed. So without fierce resistance on the ground to make the pipeline too expensive and unviable, over 100,000 East Africans will suffer displacement. So that's a huge number. And this dirty infrastructural project will have many other grave economic and ecological consequences, some of which I've already mentioned. And there's this direct action collective in Uganda called Solidarity Uganda. And they've been training and organizing communities for non-violent resistance in Midwestern Uganda since 2019. And these efforts have largely focused on land and resource sovereignty, and especially targeting the state and private state actors behind EACOP. And in preparation for the pipeline, there have already been many forced evictions, like the people that are the people from the fisher folks. So a lot more courage and a lot more courage will be needed from communities around that area where they're planning on drilling, to stop the impending doom of EACOP. So partly it will require a dose of courageous direct action to stop the project, looking at the Niger Delta, where Total and other mainstream oil giants have pillaged communities for generations. We know that it has to be stopped, or, you know, we will face the same future as communities have there. And for decades, you know, the Niger Delta women, who have suffered the worst burdens of our fossil fuel crises, have led the struggle against corporates. For nearly 70 years, their resistance put an end to land grabbing, secured the repossession of some lands, changed the government, and reinstated peace in a very militarized region. And these transformations didn't arrive through polite appeals to fossil fuel executives or political leaders. Ogoni women had to occupy oil terminals, which inspired the subsequent occupation of 6 shell flow stations by the youth in Western Niger Delta. And non-violent actions were militant and confrontational. And that included, you know, work stoppages by the transport, oil, and public sectors. It included a 2-week seizure of 4 deep sea platforms by oil workers, and an 8-day general strike against fuel hikes and the blowing up of physical infrastructure. And none of these actions can take place without a deep understanding of the inherent tragedy of a pipeline and a wealth of solidarity across the intersections of society. With East Africa fragmented by colonial borders, organizations therefore have to focus on building trust and cooperation with communities most directly affected by EACOP. So, as we've seen, that there is repression and there will be more repression, but the cost of resisting, which includes devastation of local health, economy, ecology, as well as irreversible global climate harm, is too high. So we have to resist. And so much work has already been done. We've shut down banks that considered investing in EACOP, and we can do much more in targeting also specific executives and find more climate justice allies, so that also in investment companies that consider EACOP. So at a time, where we see that the world is getting increasingly inhabitable, where there's many more climate refugees, having this atrociously long crude oil pipeline is a blight on this decisive decade for climate change and the planet's future. Even when I was in Uganda and Tanzania in April, I saw entire villages being submerged by water, and 2,000 homes were being washed away. We've seen the devastation brought on by Hurricane Beryl, as was mentioned just this, which, we know that at a time where the planet is warming, hurricanes will pick up more frequently and more intensely. And so this causes a huge concern. So from a Stop EACOP campaign and our next phase, we hope to demand and encourage greater courage and risk, and support the communities and comrades who are directly affected by EACOP. And it will also require a deeper commitment and also solidarity from beyond the region to target Total, to target CNOOC, and all of their potential insurers and financiers. This month is actually a really important time for us because the Chinese financiers will be making a decision as to whether to insure the project or not. And so last 3 weeks ago, we held a coordinated day of action in June in 10 different countries to call on the Chinese government and its state-owned financial institutions to withdraw from the project. China has been known to heavily invest in the African continent. And when they started in Uganda and Tanzania, they promised security and prosperity for the local population. But as I've given all my examples, the opposite has been true. So yeah, we will continue to put pressure on them, and we hope to see them invest in renewable energy projects instead, because we know that East Africa and the African continent more generally, has an abundance of renewable energy sources. So we will fight for them to invest in sustainable African development, and the same goes for all the other global North investors that take to Africa and want to use our resources. So I'll end it there. Hopefully that was an okay example and comprehensive overview of the Stop EACOP campaign. I will leave some links in the chat if you want to find out more about Stop EACOP. We have a WhatsApp group as well, where all the London and UK specific organising gets shared. So yeah, if anyone wants to find out more or wants to get involved, I will leave that over there. Thank you.
Oh, great, thank you. I'm sure everybody would want to applaud you. That was really comprehensive explanation of what's happening down there in Tanzania and Uganda. And we thank you for that. And the resistance is really important. If there's anything we at CLS can do, please let us know. I think it's also encouraging that in Latin America, indigenous people are already fighting the corporations, and they've had their victories, and we need to celebrate those too. And there was a film made about Even the Rain. I don't know if anybody's seen that one, where the indigenous people fought the water companies. They wanted to charge them for water, and they were victorious. And I think also recently in one of the Central American countries, where they were looking to do mining in the rainforest, indigenous people came together and opposed it, and the population actually voted against going after those resources. But people are smart. People want to save the planet. It's the only one we've got. I know they've got plans to move into Mars and all different places. They won't be carrying us, we know for sure. They won't be taking us with them. We've got to fight for this one planet we've got. And we need to, and I think CLS, not only CLS, but all individuals need to get really more engaged with this. Has got to be one of the most crucial struggles, really, because it's existential. If we don't do this, for all the other social changes we're fighting for, it will be a waste of time. We've got to save the planet, first of all. We've got our issues in the Caribbean, especially in Guyana, and I think we will have a meeting looking at what Exxon is doing down there in Guyana for the meeting after August, I think. So if there are any questions, now is a good time to put Bibi. I think it's good you mentioned Lake Victoria. That lake is also under stress with pollution, and we know how many people depend on the livelihoods around it for fishing. It's one of the big issues as well, as we've mentioned before in Jamaica with bauxite mining and the fishermen complaining about loss of fishing from the rivers and so on as well. So it's all linked. We got to be fighting it all. We've got Joseph with a question. Come in, Joseph.
Yeah, it's more comment and a little piece of question. First of all, I want to thank Bibi for her presentation. And I'm glad that we are connecting the dots. We are putting the different parts of the world that are affected. As a matter of fact, just now, at this moment, myself and Friends of the Earth Grenada and Friends of the Earth Brazil are working together. In fact, the whole Friends of the Earth Latin America and the Caribbean are working towards doing something by the 21st of July to highlight the similarity in the plight of people early on this year in April. At the end of April, the rain that affected people in Brazil caused the loss of many lives. You had also rain in East Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, and so on. And now we have the hurricane affecting the Caribbean and Central America, and all of it is connected with disaster capitalism. So we want to have a conversation on how can we intensify solidarity, because very often people think that until they have problem and come to the fore that it's not connected to other people. So the long and short, I'd like to get in touch with Bibi so that if she could be part of that conversation on the 21st.
That sounds really great, Joseph. I'd love to be part
Bibi?
of it. I'll send my email. I'll put my email in the chat.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. We've got Stephen.
Yeah, sorry to talk so much in these meetings, but you have such such fantastic guests. I wish you could hold this on a more regular basis than once a month and just for an hour. But Queen Bibi, really appreciate the information. And could you just speak for like maybe about a minute or so to talk about how instead of using bombs and guns to take over the African continent and even the Caribbean, how the Chinese are instead using dollars with promises of building up instead of destroying these nations. Can you talk about how that incentive is actually compromising Africa and the Caribbean's ability for self-determination? Thank you.
I feel like you already described it quite well there. Obviously, China is seeing Africa and the Caribbean as well as a business opportunity where they don't include the communities during those business ventures. It's pure extraction, exploitation for their own benefit. And I don't know, I can only speak to what's happening in Uganda, and there's so many projects that are being built, like even outside of EACOP and oil. and very often they'll bring in their own labor. So that, you know, Chinese laborers get shipped to Uganda. The local communities are very frustrated because when the Chinese came over, they thought, oh, this is amazing. Finally, there's a country that's actually willing to invest. You know, it's different from colonial times, which wasn't that long ago, where, you know, people were just where their lands and their people were getting targeted by, you know, the colonial states and exploited. But actually it's just exploitation in a different form. Like you said, it's actually corporate colonialism coming from Chinese stakeholders. So it's really disappointing. And there is so much that can be done, you know, with okay, I can't say with, I don't have any faith in the Ugandan government, but there is so many great things that could be done over there, because, you know, speaking about Uganda, there's so many things that grow naturally. We have a thriving coffee business, but it's not coming off the ground because, you know, no one wants to invest in that, or no one wants to work with the local coffee farmers to support them. It's all about how can we make the most money using the least resources, local resources. So yeah, thank you for your contribution. I would love to actually hear more about what's happening in the Caribbean, because I'm not as clued up on what's happening there from, you know, a Chinese perspective. And I know it feels often quite uncomfortable, anyway, what I see in the climate justice space, for people to mention China. People aren't keen to talk about it because I guess you know, China is doing a lot on the renewable front, but they're also doing an immense amount of damage. And so I think it's good that we do keep mentioning that, and especially looking at Africa, because people forget what's happening there, and the Caribbean. So yeah, thank you, Stephen.
Thank you. Any more comments or questions, Bibi? Okay, we might come back to you, Bibi, but I think, oh, Frank.
Yeah.
I see your hand, Frank.
Yeah, it's the usual protection of China, Frank. Yeah. The thing is that when you check most of the companies that you're talking about, the oil company, you must really check where it originates. If it originates from Hong Kong, or if it originates from Peking, China. There's two different Chinas if you go, but they can use the name China. I'm certain if you check this oil company, you'll find it's from Hong Kong, you know, and the Hong Kong-based Chinese have got license to do their own thing. They are capitalists. And if you know, and you know, they usually do the kind of, and look at the contract. You know, if you see the contract where you bring your own people, etc., you know that is not from the mainland China. That is not from the Communist Party China, right? That is from Hong Kong. So you've got the people keep making this thing, you know, saying Chinese as a whole lot. There is Taiwan, there is the Hong Kong Chinese, and there's, you know, they're not all the same, right? So I suppose the part that you're talking about that is doing something for climate justice is mainland China. And the other part that is polluting the atmosphere and polluting and using it is the Hong Kong Chinese or the Taiwanese Chinese. I think please make that distinction. Thanks.
Okay. I think you want to come back on that, Bibi?
Yeah, no, I kind of put it on in the chat already. There's definitely distinction,
Okay.
but in this case, it is I'm certain it's coming from mainland China, not from Hong Kong or Taiwan or a different part of China, as they're based in Beijing. And I think that's their history as well. But I do understand what you're saying, Frank.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I think at this point we can move over to Ozzi now and hear what's happening in the Caribbean or in the region. So Ozzi, you want to take the floor? And if you can do a little bit of introduction of yourself as well, bigger than I've done, that you've, you know, been active with the Trinidad oil workers for a very long time. And so this is an issue that you're very close to there in Trinidad. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. Okay, great. Yeah, thanks a lot, Luke, and of course, good day to all the comrades on this forum. Let me just, of course, start by congratulating CLS and their support for Jeremy Corbyn and his success. I think that that was really important, and we'll definitely look forward to hearing some more details about it, as well as the other independent persons that I believe CLS persons would have supported. I think it'll be, I'm very fascinated to hear their thoughts on how the elections went. Yeah, I'm Ozzi Warwick, Chief Education and Research Officer of the Oilfield Workers Trade Union. And yeah, the OWTU, of course, have been involved in a number of discussions around the question of the climate crisis. Let me also say that I'm speaking to you from Rio. I'm currently at Rio, participating in a meeting that looking at the social ecological transformation globally. And my talk will be actually not so much focused on the Caribbean, but really the work that we have been involved in with the global network of trade unions for energy democracy. So the talk will more or less kind of focus on that. And we'll see how the different pieces tie into each other. Now, the trade unions for energy democracy emerged out of a global trade union roundtable that was held in October 2012 under the title Energy Emergency, Energy Transition. Today, there are currently over 100 trade union bodies currently participating in what we call TUED, that's the Trade Unions for Energy Democracy Network, representing workers in like 37 countries and regions, 4 global union federations, 3 regional organizations, some 16 national centers, as well as 12 allied policy, academic, and advocacy organizations. So even though it's trade unions for energy democracy, because the network is highly around research, it includes certain research, policy, advocacy institutions as well. Our union, the OWTU, we're one of the first unions to join the TUED network and have participated ever since. The TUED team is based at CUNY, and that's the City University of New York, and is led by Dr. Sean Sweeney. Now, unions and TUED network from the UK. So just so that you all know who are some of the trade unions that are involved in TUED that from the UK, includes the Fire Brigades Union, Public and Commercial Service Union, International Federation of Transport Workers, which is actually based in the UK, Unison, Transport Salaried Staff Association, Unite UK, the Scottish Trade Union Congress. In fact, I remember doing a presentation to the Scottish Trade Union Congress last year, I think it was, on the question of the climate crisis and just transition, and a union from Ireland called Mandate Trade Union. Now, from its inception, TUED has carried out a lot of hard-hitting research, a lot of analysis, with the aim of doing what? Really to help unions, either individually or collectively, to formulate a strong and independent voice on energy transition and climate change, so that it is a voice that is firmly grounded in the facts and resolute about defending the interests of workers, as well as building a better world. The two are not distinct things. There's this idea that if you defend workers' interests, you don't want to build a better world. But whereas we believe that you cannot build a better world unless you are able to defend and advance workers' interests. TUED has produced a lot of working papers on this topic, and I will, at the end of the talk, put the website in the chat. But a key document is a document we call the Trade Union Program for Public Low Carbon Energy Future, which is itself, that document is itself the result of a lot of work of a trade union task force, of which I myself participated, and some other 30 unions from both North and South. basically the program is an attempt to rally and to mobilize the international trade union movement behind a very ambitious political effort to bring about a fundamental shift in climate and energy policy. And I say political effort because one of the things you recognize is that the work has behind it this political sense to change and transform the international political economy. It was recognized by unions like ours that this shift is needed, right, to ensure that the energy transition is socially just, economically viable, and effective in terms of actually reaching climate goals. Now, there are some 8 elements of the framework that I would like to share with comrades, so you get a sense as to the vision for what we talk when we talk about energy transition. So the first, of course, is to fulfill the right to energy, which meant recognizing access to energy as a human right and a basic need. 2, reverse neoliberal laws and directives affecting the power sector, which means removing the privileges and the legal protections for privately owned independent power producers, including by renegotiating or even canceling long-term power purchase agreements. 3, enforce a new pro-public mandate by establishing clear requirements and guidelines for public power companies to drive the energy transition in ways that meet the needs of people and protect the environment, so that it's not simply a private sector driven mandate where once you do that, you open it up for the local bourgeoisie along with the private multinationals to quote unquote drive the energy transition, which they really don't, as we see what is happening in countries like Guyana and even Trinidad and Tobago. It also means stopping the further privatization of the power sector assets and services. Reclaim the power sector companies to public ownership where they have been privatized, and fully what we call reintegrate or rebundle power generation, transmission, distribution, and the grid management functions. So that is the pro-public mandate. The fourth is to establish a public planned approach to energy transition by demanding that national governments and even multilateral bodies conduct rigorous ongoing assessment of decarbonization technologies and pathways informed by very clear environmental, societal, and social criteria. In other words, what we have to be very careful of is the rhetoric or simply the promises of commitment by private enterprise or by the private corporations. But when you do the rigorous assessment, you realize that for every $1 that they say they are committing to the climate crisis, to address the climate crisis, they really, when you do the rigorous assessment, they've spent 10 cents on the dollar. Okay, so they're not driving the transition. Let's just be clear about that. 5, introduce democratic governance and control by involving workers and users and communities in the decision-making process. 6, provide a high level of collective guarantees for the workers. And 7, publicly fund the energy transition. You see, we have to see the transition as a public good and should be treated as such, even when it comes to finances, because as I said, it's 10 cents on the dollar from the private sector. 8, establish a global public goods framework for the multilateral cooperation. So this will in fact entail abolishing intellectual property restrictions that have been adopted under the WTO, also the Energy Charter Treaty and other bilateral and multilateral treaty agreements that currently impede a just energy transition for many countries in the South. And instead of building the so-called public-private partnership, we say public-public partnerships to strengthen the skills and knowledge sharing between and technical cooperation. But TUED went a step further with the establishment of what we call TUED South. And so the TUED South platform was launched in Nairobi, Kenya in October 2022, where some 70 trade union leaders across the globe, including myself, from some 27 countries across the global South, gathered, and we launched TUED South. So TUED South now is a trade union platform for the public pathway approach to a just energy transition, led by the Global South. And that Nairobi meeting laid the foundations for such a South-focused trade union platform, focusing on how to strengthen the public pathway alternative, because that is key. Understanding the public pathway as an alternative to what? To the privatized, to decarbonize agenda of the G7, IMF, World Bank, and similar institutions. Now, the framing document which came out of the Nairobi meeting examined some of the main tenets of neoliberal climate and energy policy, because you see, we have to pay attention to that as we engage in this crisis, capitalism has a way of finding opportunities in crises. So we have to be very vigilant and be very rigid and rigorous in our assessment of how capitalism is adapting and reinventing itself within the climate crisis. So we wanted to, and you do that by examining very carefully the energy policies that are driven by neoliberalism. But not only that, it also, the framing document also dives into how a public pathway approach anchored in public ownership of energy offers policy options that might begin to tackle two main challenges. And here's one that we tend to ignore: energy poverty and stagnation in the poor countries of the South. And two, at the same time, we're still in this global South, energy expansion in the high growth developing economies like China and India. So in that regards, we can think of the public pathway approach, according to TUED, as a sort of evolving theory of transition, in the sense that it attempts to show a step-by-step process through the extension of public ownership of energy. The public pathway is therefore more a proposed set of programmatic commitments that can improve the chances of a new political economy emerging in the coming decades. The point is that regardless of the rhetoric coming from many of the international multilateral multilateral bodies, but also the international financial institutions, as well as the multinationals, notwithstanding those rhetoric, so long as we continue in the existing political economy, we are not going to properly address the climate crisis. In fact, we will deepen the crisis. Now, after the launch of TUED South in Nairobi, TUED South, we held a policy meeting in Johannesburg, South Africa. That was in May last year, with leaders from like 17 trade union bodies from Benin to South Africa, Mozambique, Niger, etc. Some 16 countries from Central and Southern Africa, where we discussed and agreed to this public pathway approach in addressing energy poverty and capacity scarcity in sub-Saharan Africa. Because in a lot of the discussions, that issue of energy poverty and capacity scarcity is not discussed at all. So what you can have is that, again, the global north running full speed ahead, and again, increasing that gap between those who have access to energy, basic energy, and power, and those who don't. Earlier this year, in May, we had the Latin America and Caribbean Regional Policy Meeting that was held in Bogota, Colombia, where again, we had leaders from some 23 trade unions. I was involved in that as well. But we also included some progressive government representatives, because as you know, in Latin America, the geopolitics is very dynamic, where you do have some progressive governments coming into power. For example, the current president of Colombia. Then you had the recent elections in Mexico, etc. And of course, you have some others, right? Now, again, in that meeting, we came together. This is Latin America and the Caribbean, and I'll speak a little bit about the Caribbean delegation, to really exchange the experiences and consider ways as to how we position, again, the public pathway approach to the transition in this region. And one of the major outcomes of that meeting, interestingly, was the announcement by the research centers that participated in the meeting, because as I indicated, the TUED network is trade unions, but also a lot of research centers that are sympathetic to labor, sympathetic to the workers' cause. And they launched, or they announced, the creation of a Latin American and Caribbean public pathway research network to complement the framing, our TUED South framing document. Again, to bring to bear rigorous South-based research, analysis, considerations, and as well, action-oriented programmatic options for a pro-public energy transition. In terms of well, just to mention, in July, there will be a third policy meeting in Indonesia, Bali. That meeting will include trade unions from Bangladesh, India, Indonesia, Nepal, Pakistan, the Philippines, and of course, South Korea. Of interest would be the trade unions coming out of South Korea and India in terms of how do we position the public pathway approach within those contexts. Now, coming back to the Latin American Caribbean meeting, it included myself, Sandra Messiah. I don't know if some of you all may know her, from Barbados. She represents Public Service International Caribbean. She's the Caribbean representative. And Public Service International have been very much one of those international federation, along with the International Transport Federation, very much on board with the push for the public pathway approach as an alternative to the neoliberal policy framework that is being imposed by the IMF and the World Bank. The Caribbean delegation also included Anslim Singh of the Guyana Agriculture Workers Union and Andre Lewis, president of the Caribbean Congress of Labor. So our plan as a Caribbean team is to, with the support of TUED and its resources and so on, technical resources, is to position now the public pathway approach through the Caribbean Congress of Labor to the CARICOM heads of government. So as I wrap up, because I know I have I was told 50, I'm on 15 minutes, 46 seconds. Yes, I'm checking. So as I wrap up, right, let me just say that the reports, the working papers and so on that come, the research that comes out of TUED are quite important. And we, in terms of the Oilfield Workers Trade Union, we have been using them in our current struggle. With the TUED technical support, we are right now, as we speak, fighting back against the government's just transition policy, which really was a green structural adjustment program wrapped up in the language of just transition. But what is in fact a further entrenchment of neoliberalism into the economy of Trinidad and Tobago. In other words, a lot of the social protection infrastructure that has been built up, and this goes true for the Caribbean, came, if you map it carefully, it comes out of that, the 1930s rebellion, consolidating itself in Guyana in 1938, where the trade union came together and they articulated this vision for the Caribbean and to end colonialism, bring about democracy in terms of the right to vote, independence, etc., etc., but also to create a strong social protection infrastructure for our people. That was critical. And what had happened as countries became independent, notwithstanding the bourgeois influence, there was sufficient power from the ground to enable some form of social protection infrastructure. And that is what happened in Trinidad and Tobago. In particular, when some 8 years after independence, we had the Black Power Revolution from 1971, 72, 73, 74. If you check the social protection, whether it's the national insurance, minimum wages, all of these things were put in place as a result of that, All of that is being dismantled. That's the point. All of that is being dismantled under the language, wrapped up in the language of so-called just transition. And this is why we have to fight back. So I'm particularly proud because, having worked with TUED on this document, this is what we call in the framing document towards a public pathway approach to a just energy transition for the global south. It has over 400 references because it is not, as trade unions, it's not a rhetorical point, but it is a point that is grounded in facts, grounded in a lot of research, and also dispelling a lot of myth, because there's so much myth creation around this issue of just transition. So we have to unpack, disaggregate those, dispel those myths, and begin to explore in a real way, finding an alternative to the IMF World Bank privatize to decarbonize approach. Comrades, as I close, I cannot emphasize this enough. That approach of privatize to decarbonize would further deepen the climate crisis. It is not the answer. It will not only deepen the climate crisis, it will create even more human suffering, because as part of its the impact, the social impact that it can have by dismantling social protection for ordinary working people, it will create far deeper inequality and injustice. And if that approach is going to deepen the climate crisis, widen the gap between those who have and those who don't, and further create an even deeper inequality, wider inequality, then that cannot be a just transition. So thank you very much, CLS, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for that passionate presentation, Ozzi. I think you've fairly, raised the political questions that need to be addressed on this issue of climate. And clearly the opinion is under capitalism and neoliberalism, no really change will come about. But I wondered how, with all the policy decisions that are being made, and it's being done at a level there that is not in touch with the people in many ways, and I wondered how you're getting a message down to the grassroots and to the ordinary people who might not, to the ordinary trade unionists, and also to the public, because I think it's important that this kind of information really gets out to the public. Is there any movement, kind of mass movement on the climate and trying to get this information down?
Well, I'm so glad you raised that, because right now, as I said, we are in the midst of a struggle. So one of the things we are going to do is we are right now producing a socioeconomic analysis. We are doing a survey of some 150 ordinary workers, and we are doing a key informant interviews with some sort of fairly progressive, whatever few they are, progressive academic thinkers in this field. To do what? Not simply to analyze, but to articulate a vision of a new industrial policy that will ensure the sustainability and future of our region without damaging the environment. Because we say that it can happen. It is possible. People just have to think outside the box. People have to rip the sort of bourgeois cultural that has really soaked into their minds. Just liberate and emancipate ourselves from bourgeois neoliberal thinking. And once we do that, we can begin to articulate a new vision. And in doing that, look, we have 2 massive meetings organized with workers, community groups, environmentalists. Why? We have to you're correct. We have to mobilize the masses around a vision. That is what the early labor movement did for us in the Caribbean. There was a clear, articulated vision of independence, the right to vote, building our own social institutions, separate and apart from the colonial powers. I'm saying that this is the era, this is the opportunity for us to re-articulate a new vision for the Caribbean, but we cannot do it without mobilizing the masses. The masses must be mobilized. So, but how do you mobilize the masses? If you don't say to the masses, listen, we have an alternative, because when you begin mobilizing, here's where the rhetoric comes in. When you begin mobilizing, they tell the masses, hey, we don't know what Ozzi and they're talking about. They have no clue what they're talking about. This is the only way. This is the future. This is the, what do you call it? According to the famous Tina, there is no alternative. We are saying there is an alternative, and we can therefore have the mass movement. Well, first Trinidad and Tobago. I can't speak for the other islands at the moment, but for Trinidad and Tobago, we want to be able to have the mass movement mobilize around this particular vision to really fundamentally address the climate crisis. And then we could look at working with other social movements in the Caribbean and see remember 1930 started off in one country, but it spread. Who knows? Maybe it might happen again.
Happening again.
Yeah. Thank you very much. We got a couple of hands up. We got Steve, and then Nadine, and then Joseph. Steve, you want to come in first?
Yeah, I think what Ozzi is saying is really, really important, because certainly in Britain, I mean, there is a split in the trade union movement between those who are saying, that we can make climate jobs, we can make more jobs, we can do it, and that can only work through a national climate service. As Ozzi says, for public jobs, trade union jobs. And there are those more reactionary elements in the trade union who are saying, "Oh, let's just cling on to the job we've got," and so on. And I think this, that slogan that there's no jobs on a dead planet is sort of is quite effective. But I mean, like the RMT has pointed out that as the North Sea oil is running out anyway, those is in decline. The skills of those deep sea oil drillers and so on are exactly the same skills that, with a bit of retraining, could be building windmills, etc. So that it's the same sort of skills that are there to can either be used for sort of climate progressive, if you will, jobs, or could be carrying on just going downhill until they don't exist anymore, like the coal industry. So I think but that approach that you've got of actually, working out the detail is really important, and I congratulate you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much for that. Question, comment there, Steve. I think I feel hopeful that some of the trade unions in this country, at least in the leadership, are beginning to address this issue of the environment and jobs, especially in the industries that are doing damage to the climate. And I think the shift needs to happen as well in those unions and getting the information grassroots, and they need to have a mechanism for doing that. It's not much good. The leadership have got great grand ideas and so on, and they don't get the support of the masses behind them. They've got to convince the workers that's in their interest, that we're actually fighting for climate change, and that's the challenge. I think we've got. Okay, we'll have and unless you want to reply to anything there, Ozzi, from Steve, or do you want to move on to the question from Nadine? Or you can combine them.
We can continue with the questions.
Yeah, okay. Nadine, thanks.
Yes,
and then
thanks,
Joseph.
Luke. Mine kind of follows on from what Steve said. I was at dinner last night with Jeremy and a few other people. We were talking about the weakness of the Green New Deal under Ed Miliband, who's now the Environment Minister. And I would like to pass on what Ozzi said today to some of the people here, because I think on the left here, the Green New Deal policies aren't being articulated as well as Ozzi's articulating them. Obviously, Mick Lynch and people are talking a lot from the RMT angle, but I think we need to up the game in England a bit in terms of what's being articulated in the trade union movement. And one of the outcomes of all the independents getting elected is that they're giving real strength to the Labour movement. And on the eve of the general election, Mick Lynch gave a really interesting speech, I think Luke was there, about how the role of the Labour movement as we go forward into a Labour government. And I think we could, if you're okay about it, link you up with some of these people, Ozzy, because I think it'd be quite a powerful for people over here to hear what you're saying. Is that okay if I get Steve to do the link of this meeting and send it to a few people?
Yeah, sure, Nadine. Yeah, great. That'd be great.
Great. We've already had, one of those key people, Alex Gordon, I think, from the RMT, attend one of our meetings. I'm sure he'll be very interested to hear what's happening down there in the Caribbean. Very exciting. Okay, Joseph.
Yeah, thank you, Ozzy, and you at least give me a little encouragement because, and I'm glad you said, you could only speak for Trinidad. You're not too sure for the other islands, and indeed, I am not too sure that the various trade unions in the Caribbean understand the necessity of becoming involved or factoring the issue of climate and also sustainability. I saw a press conference, OWTU, dealing with the way the bidding for that for a Petrotrin. And I was encouraged by some of the points that your leader was making, but I was asking myself, I wonder if you would if you acquire the company, whether it would be business as usual. And so I'm encouraged what you said by that. But in terms of working with an NGO, not just in Trinidad, but also in the rest of the Caribbean, NGOs that are sometimes marginalized, like my NGO. There was a time when the trade union movement in Grenada was keen to get to work along with us, like when Derek Alal, he was even the first general secretary of Friends of the Earth Grenada. Once these people pass away, the reactionary or the backwardness of the trade union is unbelievable. They don't factor in because, for instance, the environment being destroyed by the given permission to build hotels and so on that destroy the mangroves and so on to build marinas, and even with the possibility of mining oil in Grenada, and the union see that as a good because it provides jobs. I mean, I'm glad that you really seen the connection. Thank you.
Thanks, Joseph. We'll take Stephen and then Ozzy, you'll respond. Yes, Stephen?
Yes, presenters here are so mesmerizing, so intellectually stimulating. I'm amazed. Mr. Ozzy, have you thought about doing a blog or doing some TikTok as a way of getting the message out there? Because the amount of information that's available in blogs, especially utilizing YouTube, this presentation that you just made is so informative that this will be a good way to establish a blog to get the word out there. Thank you.
Okay, Ozzy.
I was waiting for this, I like to follow protocols. I was waiting for the chair to give me the signal to proceed.
It does procedure too much here. It's all right.
Yeah. All right. No, well, thanks a lot, Stephen. I mean, I'm never consider myself to be a blogger, but I know that Steve, the other Steve Cushion, I think the session is being recorded and so on. So we could always look at what we can do with that. I may appear young, but I'm not that young, so I'm not so on Quora with I think they have vlog now. You could be a vlogger, blogger, and so on. But it's a very, very important suggestion because social media, everybody's on their phones. That's where people are getting their information. It is part of the reality of this new world that we live in. So yeah, thank you very much. And let me also thank all the comrades for their comments. I just want to kind of say that I really wanted comrades to see this presentation as building on what Bibi presented. And I think it is important to see the two together, because the struggles that she mentioned, the fight in Uganda and so on, is a fight that you can find in many parts of the world. And it's a crucial fight. It's an existential, she mentioned it's an existential fight, right? So what I was hoping to do with this talk is to say, listen, as we engage in that struggle, the opposers to that struggle, those who were actually want, pretend to, or those who say just transition and we are addressing the climate crisis, but at the same time, even as they say that, they're not investing in any real energy transition. They are in further making it even more difficult for people to access clean energy. All right. So I think it is really important for us to see the two as being absolutely connected. The struggle for a better planet is a struggle for a new vision and an alternative to the dominant worldview that actually determines regional and national policies. So if we connect the struggle on the grassroots fight with the attempt to articulate this vision, I think we would be keeping within that tradition of how do you transform a world that seems to have gone astray, gone awry, right? And I therefore really, in other words, we draw on the inspiration of those who are willing to fight and to fight big power, building on that and mobilizing around this clear new vision that we have for our planet, and really utilizing every aspect of our networks to articulate that vision. Because that's the key, presenting an alternative vision for how human society is organized. We do not have to accept that human society can only be organized through market fundamentals or through capitalism or the capitalist mode of production. And we certainly cannot go into a new world that we want to build with alternative energy sources and so on, with the current political economy of capitalism. Because for one, it will definitely not solve the climate crisis, but it will further deepen the social and human crisis that we have to face, including things such as neocolonialism, race, the continuation of racism, hegemony of Western capital, over the rest of the world. So yeah. So I also want to thank Bibi and their group for their struggles that inspire us all to continue searching and fighting for that alternative vision.
Yes, thanks, Ozzi. I think the combination has worked really well, because I think the grassroots things that are happening in Africa is really crucial, that we can all learn from and develop on, and we replicating that not only in the Caribbean and Latin America, but in the UK, because they in this country still, activists, and I always worry for Bibi, because I know she's out there quite a lot. Big oil getting arrested, charged, people imprisoned, criminal record for fighting to save the planet, and that's the stage we're at. So, there's still a lot of work to be done, and we keep up the struggle. We got a hand up. Ola, how you doing?
You've got David's hands up as well.
Yeah.
David,
He's got his hand
I don't
up.
see David's hand. Okay, all right.
Waving his hand.
All right, Ola and then David, because I called Ola.
Okay.
David, you'll be next. Ola, come in.
Thank you, Ozzi, and thank you, Bibi, and thank you, CLS, for today's presentation. It really, two wonderful presentations, and both actually highlighting the plight, not just of the global south, but the global north, and really the world in itself. And as listening to what your kind of summarization just now, Ozzi, And the truth of the matter is, you know, we've just gone 2 elections, and it's clear to me that society in itself, civil society in itself, needs to reform itself, in the sense that it's going nowhere with this continued every 4 year, every 5 year, you know, voting in a party who tells us that we've given them a mandate, and then that allows them to do X, Y, and Z, a number of things that are not on their portfolios and will never be you know, above board and told to the people in itself. And that in itself is seriously difficult, because if you can't see what is written or in front of you, and we still also have the 5th or 4th estate telling us or providing cover for these people, then it's extremely difficult for people to really understand issues. And what tends to happen, in my opinion, is that the younger people become more disenfranchised and more apathetic towards government and policy. And therefore, we're in that chase your tail scenario. You know, I have to vote someone out, but even if I vote someone in, they're not going to be any different from the others. So brilliant presentation. And I just wanted to say, you know, for me, it's the vision you put out there, as brilliant as it is, and I'm not saying it in a cheeky way, but we've known this for years. Most of what you're saying, even though you're repackaging it and you're saying it in a different way, has been out there for years. And all of these policymakers know what you're saying as well. But if money and finance is going to be at the center, how does civil society stop that from happening? How do we stop these people from so easily flaunting what we come up with and then saying, well, this is how we're going to repackage and, as you said, reinvent capitalism or neoliberalist ideas in order to bamboozle the people? Because basically, from a footballing sense, they're just passing the ball through our legs and dribbling us and walking away and scoring goals. What does civil society need to do, is my question to you.
Okay, thank you there, Ola. Oh, what screen have I got? I've got a different screen here. Something's going on.
Yes.
Can we come in?
Go
Yeah,
to
great.
David.
That's better. I could see it. I could see it. Yes. Okay, David, come in.
Unmute, David.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. Thanks, Lou. Yeah, I'll try not to repeat what people. Again, as always, great meeting. Thank you, Comrade Bibi, Comrade Ozzi. Wonderful speeches. And Comrade Ozzi, correct? They are totally linked, as has been said. And there's some lessons to be learned. Now, a union organizer over here, Nigel Flanagan, has written a couple of books very recently. Nigel Flanagan has worked for years in different African countries, and he is heavily advising the British trade union movement to learn from them. So 2 incidents he quotes: in Kenya, in recent years, security guards who suffered attack when there was a bombing, terrorist incident some years ago. They were on very low wages. They were they organized themselves. They formed a wonderful trade union. They did it by using bicycles and mopeds, driving around the cities. They organized themselves from the bottom up. And in Morocco, female call center workers, again, who the wages-wise, the lowest of the low, if you like, they organized themselves. So the British trade union movement has a lot to learn. But I come back to, you see, the thing about China, and I have to mention it with respect. It's not the Chinese, it's the government in Uganda, and it's governments in the Caribbean and governments in African countries that are totally corrupt, that accept these deals with the Chinese, but don't do it for their people. I would imagine they're probably creaming off lots of money. So they should be the target in actual fact. Cuba in recent years, over a number of years, has accepted aid from the Chinese. The Cubans always stipulate, we will use Cuban experts and Cuban workers. And they come to an agreement and do it. If the Cubans do it because they look after their people. So with respect, I would say it's the Ugandan government, which you would said, Comrade Bibi, 20 years, corrupt, dictatorial. They're doing the deal for themselves. The Chinese are not philanthropists. They're going to be doing a business deal. And if the governments just roll over and say, okay, you know, you can bring your own people in, that's what, but I would say those corrupt governments are the target. And from what Comrade Ozzi has said, you know, the movement in Trinidad and Tobago, organising workers, unions, environmental groups together and making a big push is the way forward. Thank you. But thanks again, both the speakers, for excellent contributions.
Thanks, David. It's a good point to make, I think, because you know, and I think I made the same point some years ago when Guyana actually were building a hotel, and the contract was awarded to a Chinese company, which actually brought in laborers. And Guyana is not short of laborers. The unions did some protesting, but because the unions were not working together as well, you know, the Chinese were able to get away with it. And at the same time, Cuba was actually having a project that they refused, and the Chinese had to accept it. So I think in some ways, you know, we've got to be strong as well in fighting the corruption and the opportunism that goes on with it, with these contracts and with how people do work. Yeah, okay. I don't know if Ozzi wanted to come in there with anything. Ozzi? You wanted to respond?
Okay, well, yeah, just very quickly, to support the point that David was making. I remember some years ago, I'm speaking about Cuba, the Spanish hotel chain, Melia, were coming in to build a massive hotel, right, in Havana. And the Cubans said, okay, you want to invest in Havana, that's good. Because we all know old Havana had, you know, these very old buildings, but they were very deteriorated at the time. And they said, okay, sure, but here's what. We will agree that you will come and build your hotel, but you must refurbish 3 blocks around the entire hotel, all of those buildings. All right? And in other words, you're correct. In the end, it depends on if you have neo-colonial governments, and I saw someone mention that in the chat, Ola, I think, then that is what you're going to have in Uganda. But if you have progressive governments like Cuba, you can make the investments work for the people. And one of the things about what the Cuban government did is when they refurbished those apartments around, they didn't throw out the people who've lived there for many years, but rather those people continue to live in that community. With regards to the point about, I think Ola was making the point about nothing, what I'm articulating is not new. He's absolutely correct, because all I'm doing is re-articulating what could be found in that famous 1938 resolution that came out of the trade unions. So that is correct. With regards to the other question, I mean, that's a big question about civil society. And this is how I'm, you know, thinking about it, how I'll answer that. One, I can't speak to the civil society in Britain, the UK, or any other country. What I can say is this. One of the key strategy used by capital was to destroy and break the mass movement. Through neoliberalism, they've been able to really divide up the mass movement. There's no feeling of a mass movement. There's all these sporadic groups doing many different things, everybody fighting for their interests and so on. But there is no sense of this grand unity or construct, because there was no longer this belief that you can organize society differently. And if we're asking what can civil society do, I think the only thing I'm thinking about is how do we consolidate so-called civil society, because that's the term they use, NGOs. So it's no longer mass movement. It became NGOs, civil society, a whole set of groups. That's what they became. And therefore, there was fragmentation and a dismantling of a mass movement. But if we can at least agree as a general fundamental that human society can be organized differently, and this is how it can be, then we can begin to reconstitute a mass movement. Because it's only through a strong, progressive mass movement can we be able to hold to account those who are in office, but even more so, we can be able to force how even private capital invests. In the absence of a strong, united, progressive mass movement, then capital is allowed to pick off, right? The academics, the economists, the politicians, the political parties, and continue to perpetuate the current organization of human society for one purpose: accumulate, well, that's three. Accumulate, according to Marx. Three things. That's all they do. Accumulate. So I think it's a very difficult task, but it is a task that we must recommit ourselves to if we are to save this planet. As difficult as it may appear, we cannot, no matter how difficult it appears, we cannot allow capital to reconsolidate itself within this climate crisis and perpetuate the racism, the inequality, institutional, structurally, and otherwise, and keep human society organized in this way for the purpose of simple accumulation. So I guess that's the best I could do at what was a very difficult question.
Thank you very much for that, Ozzy. I think we're living in a changing world, and I'm very hopeful. I must say, when you consider, and maybe it's just on the euphoria still of getting Jeremy elected against all the odds and fighting and battling, stomping those pavements for the many hours and so on, and seeing a good result. But I'm reminded as well about, being on a demonstration yesterday with another 100,000 people marching again to support Free Palestine. Jeremy Corbyn was one of the key speakers at the end of that march, and also the RMT Assistant General Secretary Alex Gordon. And it was very powerful to be reminded about the protests that happened all over the world, the universities, the students that came out, shut down universities, demanding that they disinvest from Israel. So I think we're in a shifting world, and what's happening in Gaza, and I think sadly the Palestinians are paying a very, very high price for what is happening. But I don't think the world will be the same. We look at the comedy or I don't know what to call it, that's going on with American elections between Trump and Biden. You wonder, what kind of society, what kind of world is this? Something is shifting in a very big way. The conservatives finally ousted here. Unfortunately, I don't think much difference between them and the new leader, but we got some more room for fight and change. And I like it that also that Bibi mentioned about the climate change and who gets affected. Of course, the poor gets affected the most in this, and women often will be disadvantaged the most when these crises arise. And so we get to fight sexism, we get to fight classism, and all these challenges that are being thrown up by, I think, a big catalyst really that is happening is in Gaza, and we continue to build on the
It's three hands up.
strengths that we see. Yeah, sorry?
It's three hands up.
3 hands. I can't see them, but
Yeah, there's
okay.
Nayak, Bibi, and Joseph.
Oh, thank you for pointing out, Fran, because I'm not seeing it on my screen. Okay. If you call them in the order that you said, Frank, please, that they've gone up. If you
Okay,
and they can
Kwabena.
come in.
Okay. All right. I don't want to dwell on the Chinese issue. I think people who make a point about China's intervention in the economic development of the Caribbean and Africa are people of good heart. And we are still living to an extent in a in an imperialist world in which our resources are being stolen. So they have a right to be fearful. However, we should be careful of the huge propaganda campaign being taken by the US, Europe, and the United Kingdom against China and the threat that it poses to their rapacious enterprises across the globe. As David said, China and the Chinese government, Chinese businessmen and Chinese businesswomen are not running an international charity. If you are not sharp, they will screw you. And so it is for us not to be bamboozled or be subject to blandishments by the Chinese and then sell our people down the river. We have to make sure that our government are hard negotiators and that whilst development can be bad, it can also be good. And it is up to us, including CLS, as well as local organizations and local people, to push our governments to be democratic and represent our interests. My question, I have a question, believe it or not, to Bibi and Ozzi, which is, there's a lot of talk about the de-dollarization of international trade, which presents a threat to US hegemony and so on. To what extent is that de-dollarization playing a role, positive or otherwise, in the climate and energy issues that we currently have?
Thank you. Come in, Ozzy. I'm sorry you're getting these big questions at this late stage of the day, but here you go.
Yeah,
Are
I
you
was
with us?
wondering, I was wondering, I thought Kwabena was my friend and comrade, and he would show some pity on my tiredness. But he comes with this, he bowls this ball, which is clearly a googly, and I'm afraid he's gonna take my stump. It's a really, really good question, and I haven't thought about it, and I'm not one of those who will speak to something that I haven't thought deeply about. I haven't. It is a very interesting question, and I'm thinking so a question like that, if I am to just take it out of its concrete terms and put it in a more general proposition, I'm thinking of the entire financial infrastructure, global financial infrastructure. If we think about it, the global capitalism was given its energy for playing on a pond through the energy sector, right? If you consider how the growth of global capital and these financial institutions, they came with the growth of exploitation of energy sources. And so I guess I'm thinking, and on top of that, what kept that infrastructure, that global financial infrastructure together was the dollar. Okay. So the question is, would the de-dollarization lead to the democratization of the global financial infrastructure or architecture, that is? Will it dismantle that the international financial architecture, which is dominated by, in particular, the US dollar, Does it have that potential? Will it give rise to new opportunities for other centers of power? Because with the dollarization and it's linked to energy, it became the center of power, right? So if we de-dollarize, will that lead, or will that create an architecture that doesn't that is not centralized, but is decentralized by regions? So I remember, for example, in Latin America, Chavez had the idea, I think it was called the sucre. I can't recall the name of the currency.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, the
Super.
idea of a currency for the region. So I think it is a very, very interesting question. And I'm just playing it out in my head within that context of the international financial architecture and how it will impact on that architecture. And especially if we are talking about shifting, having a shift in terms of energy, with shifting, with that transition that we are talking about, energy transition also include a financial transition, where we transition away from the central dominance of the US dollar to more regional, decentralized types of currencies. How that will impact the climate, I don't know, Kwabene.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'm
Thank
still
you,
your
Ozzy.
friend.
Thank you very much there, Ozzy. Only because of time. I know this is a big question, but I want to give Bibi a chance to answer it too, because you did put it to Bibi too. Yeah, you're back. Bibi, you're back. And Bibi, you'll forgive me if you don't want to take on this last minute too, because we got a few minutes on this. And I also should mention there's no meeting in August. We will meet in September, and we probably will come back to this issue, because I had asked Melinda Janke to speak on oil in Guyana at this meeting, but she couldn't speak at this meeting, and we might be able to have her in September. So we might revisit this whole issue again. But yeah, please come in, Bibi. I don't know if you want to respond here.
Sorry, my internet cut out again, so I didn't fully hear the question. But I just wanted to quickly come back to the point, sorry, the last mention of China, because in our communications from like a Stop EACOP perspective, we're not necessarily critical of China as a whole. We're just critical of this project in particular because it has impacted so many communities. But there is also positive development from China even in Uganda. So I just want to put that out. And if you look at our website, it's also, it's very evident from there. And from our perspective as well, like we put pressure on the corporations mainly because they've been proven to be so movable, and it's much harder to put pressure on, say, the Ugandan government, because we only a grassroots movement. Many of us are far away from Uganda. I am Ugandan, but many of the people that are involved in this campaign aren't. So we put pressure as a grassroots movement where we can, and that has been proven to be successful because we have had so many financial backers that are mainly historically invested in Total, so the French company, to back out of the project. And I believe that we can do the same with Chinese corporations, although it will be more difficult to get them to divest. But divestment has a massive long history, successful history. So I just wanted to put that out there as a final point. And I appreciated Ola's comments as well of the the African governments being controlled by, they're basically colonial puppets, and they're only invested or interested in capital. But yeah, thank you for your comments on that, Dennis, and I'll leave.
Thank you very much, Bibi. We're running out of time very, very speedily now, and I think there's a couple other questions up. I'll just add my little bit to the dollar. Sorry, Frank. I'll just add my little bit to the dollar question to say that right now the American dollar the rate is very high interest rate, You know that will what that will mean for all of us who are indebted to the dollar in the Caribbean and other places. They got to pay for the wars, I guess. So the high interest rate will pull in that money. Thank you. The next one, Frank, you want to put up the next question?
Yeah, Joseph to come.
Yeah, I'm glad that
make it quick.
Dennis mentioned the war because I was going to mention that quickly. We need to pay attention to the greenwashing that is taking place. That is deceiving people in terms of taking action. It's very sophisticated. And then also the militarization and war that is affecting the climate. We need to factor in that too. You may not know that, but the military is the only sector that is not factored in climate negotiation or climate change, and they are one of the main emitters of the gases. And finally, Ozzi, can you post the link you promised at the beginning, website?
Yeah. Good. Okay, we'll take. Was there a last question coming up there, Frank?
That
we could only have one more. That was it. Okay.
Yeah. Is there a way we can get access to the document you were discussing, Ozzy?
Yes, I just posted the TUED website, and on that website you will get this document, the public pathway, the framing document we call it. Yeah, along with many other resources.
Okay. Thanks for that. And I remind people that they will get a copy of the recording because I know Steve is pretty efficient at sending that out. Okay, I think we're wrapping up what's been a really interesting meeting, and I think informative, inspiring. You know, I can find all kinds of words. And thank you very much, Bibi. Thank you very much, Ozzy, for making this, and to all the questions. You know, the questions that came in and comments. So thanks you all. I remind people, you know, CLS rely on you coming to our meetings. Our strength is the amount of support we get from you, the support we get from your membership, and so on. And we look forward to seeing you in September because traditionally we don't have a meeting in August. And so we won't have a meeting in August, and I know some people would like us to meet more often, but it will be in September. And so thank you all for attending again, and thanks to the executive that really put together this meeting, hold it together this time with all of the presentations that have been made. And I will close by just reminding myself of a victory for Jeremy Corbyn and my borough because I live here, and I look forward to the next steps because although it's been a victory, we know there's a lot of work to be done. And I think CLS will be supporting whatever Jeremy's doing in North London, in North Islington, and I hope be working closely with them over there. Thank you all. Until September. Have a good August.